There's a story from the Constitutional Convention of 1787. When it ended, Ben Franklin walked out of Philadelphia's Independence Hall to find this anxious crowd. And there was a woman from Philadelphia who was the first to speak to him. And she asked, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" And Franklin's reply is really famous. "A republic," he said, "if you can keep it. If we can keep it." We have lost something Franklin had, which is a sense that this experiment, America, can fail. Things can truly go wrong. And one lesson of Trump is that we need to rediscover that catastrophic imagination, because there is a big flaw at the center of American democracy, a weakness, a bug in the software. And Trump found it, and he used it. And other people are going to find it and use it too. This election is close. It is close enough that something small could completely have thrown it. If Trump were just a bit more self-disciplined, if he hadn't bragged about sexual assault while wearing a microphone, if Clinton's pneumonia had lingered a little bit longer, America would be ruled by a cruel narcissist with authoritarian ambitions. And when I say authoritarian ambitions, I mean it. One of the truly important things we learned about Trump is that he admires dictators for being dictators. He was asked about Vladimir Putin and said,
"He's running his country, and at least he's a leader, unlike what we have in this country."
Yeah, but again, he kills journalists that don't agree with him.
About North Korea's Kim Jong-un, he said,
"He goes in, he takes over, and he's the boss. It's incredible."
And here Trump was on Saddam Hussein.
"He killed terrorists. He did that so good. They didn't read him the rights."
The thing to note there is it's not just that Trump admires authoritarians. What he admires about them is that they are authoritarians. He likes that they dispense with niceties like a free press and due process and political opposition. Trump has promised to bring this perspective to America. He says he'll jail Hillary Clinton if he's elected. He wanted to strengthen libel laws to make it easier to cow the press. During rallies, he pushed his followers to assault protesters and promised he would pay their legal fees if they got arrested. Imagine someone like that with the power to pardon. So even if we dodge the bullet, we still need to understand how it is that we as a country came to be standing in front of a gun. It would have been no surprise to the Founding Fathers that Americans have proven susceptible to the charms of a demagogue. In Federalist 10, James Madison wrote that men of factious tempers, of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may, by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages and then betray the interests of the people. That is Founding Father speak. For, yeah, demagogues are appealing. They can win elections and then they can betray the very people who elected them. And it's why we have a representative government, not a democracy. It is part of why the founders made the American presidency so weak. They always saw the popular will as a potential point of failure, a point of weakness. And it is credit to the long success of the political institutions they created that we think dangerous men can only win elections in far-off lands. But what's happening here, what's happening now, is that our institutions are weakening. And that's where we have to turn to understand Trump, to our institutions. Donald Trump did two things to get this close to the presidency. The first was he won the Republican primaries. The second is that after winning the primaries, he united the Republican Party behind him. These are not the same thing, even though they're often conflated. Trump only had 13.8 million votes when he won the Republican primaries. The distance between those 13.8 million votes and the more than 60 million votes he's expected to get in the election is vast. In 1972, George McGovern won the Democratic primary even though much of the Democratic Party hated him. Major Democratic interest groups like the AFL-CIO, they refused to endorse him in the general election. Top Democrats, including former governors of Florida and Texas and Virginia, organized Democrats for Nixon groups. McGovern went on to lose with less than 40% of the vote, a huge defeat driven by Democrats who abandoned a nominee they considered unacceptable. A similar path was possible for Trump. Top Republicans viewed him with horror.
This man is a pathological liar, a narcissist at a level I don't think this country's ever seen.
Donald Trump's candidacy is a cancer on conservatism, and it must be clearly diagnosed, excised, and discarded.
Donald Trump is a delusional narcissist and an orange-faced windbag. A speck of dirt is way more qualified to be president.
And then every single one of those Republicans endorsed Donald Trump. So did Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. It is not surprising with this kind of elite support that Trump managed to get Republican-leaning voters behind him. The final NBC Wall Street Journal poll of the election found that 82% of likely Republican voters were supporting Trump, a precise match for the 82% of likely Democratic voters supporting Clinton. There are two things to say about this. The first is moral. There are many Republicans who honestly believe Trump would make a good or at least adequate president. Their endorsement of his candidacy is perfectly honorable, even if I think it is wrong-headed. But many of the Republicans mentioned here believe Trump is a threat to world peace and to fundamental norms, values, and institutions of American democracy. Their endorsements of his candidacy will stain their careers, and if he is elected, and if the worst comes to pass, they will be remembered by history for their abandonment of country. But the second thing that needs to be said here is structural. And believe it or not, that's where it actually gets scary. Here is the single most important sentence for understanding both Trump's rise and this dangerous era in American politics. The defining characteristic of our moment is that parties are weak while partisanship is strong. That sentence comes from political scientist Julia Azari. And her point is this: parties, particularly the Republican Party, can no longer control whom they nominate. But once they nominate someone, once they nominate anyone, even Donald Trump, that person is guaranteed the support of the party's elites and of its voters. Let's look at that in two pieces. First, how did parties lose control of their primaries? Primaries used to not matter that much. Party officials made the decisions that counted at the conventions, where they had almost total control. But we've moved in recent decades towards primaries. They're more democratic. They give voters more of a voice. That's made parties and party officials less important. But one way parties kept influence in primaries was through money. Party organizations, they signaled to donors which candidates to back, who to take seriously. But money's turned out to be a whole lot less important in winning primaries than anyone thought. Just ask Jeb Bush, who spent $130 million only to be humiliated, even as Trump spent almost nothing to win. Similarly, parties used to drive media attention by signaling to reporters which candidates to take seriously. But that process is also democratized. Just look at Trump's Twitter feed and how it can drive news coverage on its own. But the most important thing parties have is the trust of their own voters. It's why endorsements matter. They represent party officials using the credibility they've built with their supporters to tell them who to vote for. Trump didn't have any Republican endorsements of note until he had already won a bunch of primaries. And that arguably helped him. It was proof that he really was untouched and untainted by the unpopular Republican establishment. The Republican elites have so totally lost the faith of their base that their efforts to persuade Republican voters who are ignored at best and counterproductive at worst is a tremendous failure of the Republican Party. So that's how the party loses control of its primaries. But then there's a puzzle. If partisans have so little faith in their party, why are they so much likely to back whomever their party nominates? The answer, in short, is fear and loathing of the other party. In 1964, 31% of Republicans had cold, negative feelings towards the Democratic Party, and 32% of Democrats had cold, negative feelings towards the Republican Party. By 2012, that had risen to 77% of Republicans and 78% of Democrats. That is a lot more anger and fear towards the other party. Today, fully 45% of Republicans and 41% of Democrats believe the other party's policies threaten the nation's very well-being. This fear, it is strongest among the most politically involved, which makes sense. You're more likely to take an active interest in American politics if you think the stakes are really high. But it also means that the people driving American politics, and particularly the people driving low turnout party primaries, have the most apocalyptic view of the other side. The angrier and more fearful partisans are, the more of a market there is for media that convinces them to be even angrier and even more afraid. It is no accident that the CEO of Breitbart News, a hyper-ideological conservative media outlet that specializes in scaring the hell out of its audience, is leading Trump's campaign. And one reason Trump has been able to unite Republicans is that Republican-leaning media has convinced itself and its base that the alternative to Trump is a literal criminal who belongs in jail. This offers a rationale for voting Republican even if you don't particularly like your candidate. A majority of Trump voters say they're voting against Clinton rather than for Trump, which helps explain the unified party support for Trump. Republican office holders are terrified that if they don't support him or are seen in any way as contributing to Clinton's election, they'll face the wrath of their conservative base. So here then is a key failure point in modern American politics, and observing it in action requires looking no further than the Republican Party. Voters' dislike of their own party has broken the primary process, but fear of the opposition has guaranteed unified party support to the nominee. That means whoever manages to win a flawed competition dominated by the angriest, most terrified partisans ends within spitting distance of the presidency. Elites are often blamed for Trump's rise. He's said to be a backlash to their failures, their corruption, their obliviousness, their self-dealing, their condescension, and all that may be true. But past moments in American politics have also featured angry voters and out-of-touch elites and social problems. Those moments, however, featured political and media gatekeepers with more power, and so Trump-like candidates were destroyed in primaries or at party conventions or by a press that paid them little mind. Now, however, traditional gatekeepers have neither the power nor the cultural capital to stop Trump-like candidates. And in the Republican Party, where the collapse of institutional authority is most severe and most dangerous, the aftermath of a Trump loss will further weaken the party center. Trump supporters are going to turn on the Republican Party officials whose tepid backing they feel doomed their candidate. Sean Hannity has already begun calling Paul Ryan a saboteur. The country is on a fast path to becoming majority-minority, and many white male voters will continue to perceive this change as a loss in both status and political power, which in some ways it is. Now, it's not to say Republicans will always or even routinely nominate candidates as dangerous as Trump. Much had to go wrong for him to be nominated. The lesson of this unnerving year is that less can be taken for granted than we thought. The American people are not immune to demagogues. The American political system is too weakened to reliably stop them. America, like all the world's other countries, is vulnerable to catastrophic political failure. It can happen here. Trump is a crude and undisciplined demagogue. But we need to remember, the world also produces clever, disciplined demagogues, and they are the ones who truly threaten republics.